The house was silent, not the peaceful silence of rest, but the kind that lingers after something has gone terribly wrong. Oil lamps flickered against painted walls as shadows stretched across the floor. In the inner chambers of a Roman home, a woman sat alone, her breath slow, her hands steady. Though the world around her was collapsing, outside, voices whispered. A scandal was spreading through the streets. Her name was already being spoken in judgment. In ancient Rome, a woman's life could be defined by a single accusation, a rumor, a moment of disobedience. Or worse, a crime committed by a man. She could be honored as the guardian of family virtue, or destroyed as a symbol of shame. There was no middle ground. History remembers emperors, generals, and senators. Their victories are carved into stone. Their names echo through time, but behind the power of Rome stood women whose lives were bound by invisible chains. Some ruled from the shadows, shaping the fate of emperors. Others were silenced within their own homes, their voices lost to history. And some became legends not because they sought power, but because they were broken by it. Stories of loyalty, of manipulation, of survival, of quiet resistance in a world that rarely listened. This is the hidden world of women, ancient Rome, a world of control, expectation, and consequences that could be fatal. To understand the role of women in ancient Rome, one must first step into the structure of Roman society itself, a system built upon hierarchy, authority, and control. At the center of every Roman household stood the paterfamilias, the male head of the family. His authority was nearly absolute. He controlled property, finances, and decisions affecting every member of the household. Under his power lived not only his wife and children, but also extended relatives, servants, and enslaved people. For women, this structure defined the boundaries of their existence. From birth, a Roman woman's life was shaped by expectations rather than choice. She was expected to be modest, obedient, and devoted to the family above all else. Her primary purpose was clear: to marry, to bear children, and to maintain the household. Yet within these constraints, the reality of women's lives was far more complex than the rigid ideals imposed upon them. Girls in Roman society were typically married at a young age, often in their early teens. These marriages were rarely about personal affection. They were strategic alliances between families, designed to strengthen social status, political connections, or economic security. A young bride might find herself in a household far from her childhood home, expected to adapt quickly to new expectations and responsibilities. Despite this, Roman women were not entirely without agency. Unlike in some other ancient cultures, women in Rome could own property, inherit wealth, and manage financial affairs, especially if they were not under the strict legal authority of a husband. Widows, in particular, often gained a degree of independence that married women lacked. They could oversee estates, conduct business, and exert influence within their social circles. Yet this independence came with limitations. Women could not vote. They could not hold political office. Their influence, when it existed, was indirect, exercised through relationships with fathers, husbands, or sons. This created a world where power was often hidden, operating beneath the surface of official structures. One of the most striking examples of how a woman's story could shape Roman identity is that of Lucretia. According to Roman tradition, Lucretia was a noblewoman whose virtue became the center of a tragic and transformative event. She was assaulted by a member of the royal family, an act that brought unbearable shame despite her innocence. Unable to live with the dishonor, she took her own life after revealing the crime. Her death ignited outrage across Rome. The monarchy was overthrown, and the Roman Republic was born. Lucretia's story became a powerful symbol of virtue, sacrifice, and the consequences of tyranny. Yet beneath the legend lies a darker truth. Her value in history is tied to her suffering. She is remembered not for her life, but for the way she died. This pattern repeats throughout Roman history. Women often appear in historical accounts at moments of crisis, their stories shaped by scandal, tragedy, or political intrigue. Consider the Vestal Virgins, priestesses dedicated to the goddess Vesta. These women held a unique and paradoxical position within Roman society. They were granted privileges denied to most women: independence from male authority, the ability to own property, and a respected public role. Yet their status came with an extreme condition. They were required to remain virgins for 30 years, maintaining the sacred fire of Rome. If a Vestal virgin broke her vow, the punishment was severe and ritualistic. She would be buried alive, sealed within an underground chamber with minimal supplies, left to die in darkness. The method was designed to avoid technically shedding her blood, but the result was the same: death hidden beneath the earth. One recorded case describes a condemned Vestal being led through the streets in silence, her face veiled as crowds watched in uneasy stillness. No one spoke, no one intervened. The law was absolute. This mixture of reverence and brutality reveals the fragile position of women in Roman society. They could be elevated as symbols of purity and honor, but the consequences of failing those expectations were unforgiving. Even within the highest levels of Roman power, women navigated a dangerous landscape. Empresses and noble women often wielded influence behind the scenes, advising emperors, shaping political decisions, and forming alliances. Yet their power was always precarious. A single accusation could destroy their reputation or even cost them their lives. One of the most infamous figures in this shadow world of influence was Livia Drusilla, the wife of Emperor Augustus. Livia was known for her intelligence, composure, and political awareness. Ancient sources portray her as both a devoted partner and a calculating figure, who may have manipulated events to secure her son's rise to power. Whether these accusations were true or exaggerated by later historians remains uncertain. What is clear is that her influence was significant and deeply feared. In Roman society, a powerful woman often became the subject of suspicion. Strength was admired in men, but in women it was frequently portrayed as dangerous or unnatural. The stories told about them were shaped by this bias, blending fact with rumor until truth became difficult to separate from myth. For most women, however, life was far removed from imperial intrigue. Daily existence centered on the household. Women managed domestic tasks, oversaw servants, and ensured the smooth operation of family life. In wealthier homes, this might involve supervising large estates and coordinating complex networks of labor. In poorer households, it meant hard work performed directly: cooking, weaving, cleaning, and raising children in challenging conditions. Despite their lack of formal power, women played a crucial role in preserving Roman culture. They were responsible for teaching children the values of the society: discipline, respect, and loyalty to family and state. In this sense, they shaped the next generation of Roman citizens, influencing the future in ways that were rarely acknowledged in official records. Yet even this role carried pressure. A woman's worth was often judged by the success of her children and the honor of her household. Failure in either area could lead to social stigma or personal hardship. Divorce, while legally possible, could damage a woman's reputation, especially if she was blamed for the separation. The emotional weight of these expectations is difficult to fully reconstruct, but glimpses appear in surviving letters and accounts. In some writings, women express concern over family honor, anxiety about marriage arrangements, and the constant need to maintain respectability in a society quick to judge. These fragments reveal a quieter form of struggle, not the dramatic tragedies recorded by historians, but the daily tension of living within strict boundaries. The role of women in ancient Rome was not defined by a single narrative. It was a spectrum of experiences shaped by class, circumstance, and personality. Some women navigated the system skillfully, finding ways to exert influence and secure stability. Others suffered under its limitations, their lives constrained by expectations they could not escape. And some, like Lucretia, became symbols, their personal tragedies transformed into stories that shaped the identity of an entire civilization. Yet for all their differences, these lives shared a common thread. They existed in a world where power was unevenly distributed, where voices were often unheard, and where the consequences of stepping beyond accepted roles could be severe. The deeper one looks into Roman history, the clearer it becomes. The story of Rome is not only the story of its emperors and armies, but also the story of the women who lived, endured, and sometimes suffered beneath its shadow. Beyond the walls of noble houses and imperial palaces, the lives of women in ancient Rome unfolded in countless different ways, shaped not only by law and expectation, but by class, fortune, and circumstance. The image of the quiet, obedient Roman matron was an ideal, repeated in literature, praised in speeches, and carved into public memory. But reality was far more complicated, and often far darker. In the crowded streets of Rome, far from the controlled order of elite households, women lived lives defined by survival. Markets buzzed with activity as vendors called out to passing crowds. Among them were women selling food, cloth, and small goods, working long hours to support themselves and their families. These women existed outside the refined image of Roman virtue, yet they were essential to the city's daily life. Their labor kept the economy moving, even as their voices remained largely absent from historical records. For enslaved women, life was even more precarious. Enslavement in Rome was not based on race, but on conquest, debt, or circumstance. Entire populations captured in war were brought into Roman households, where they lived under the absolute control of their owners. Enslaved women performed a wide range of duties, from domestic service to agricultural labor, and were often subjected to harsh treatment with little recourse. Their bodies, like their labor, were considered property. Their stories were rarely recorded, their suffering absorbed into the silent machinery of the empire. Even among free women, security was never guaranteed. Reputation could be as fragile as glass. A whisper of scandal could spread quickly through social circles, damaging a woman standing beyond repair. Roman society placed enormous emphasis on female virtue, yet that virtue was judged publicly and often harshly. A woman's behavior, appearance, and associations were constantly scrutinized. This tension between expectation and reality is perhaps most visible in the life of Messalina, the wife of Emperor Claudius. Ancient historians describe her as reckless, manipulative, and dangerously ambitious. Stories surrounding her life are filled with scandal, secret affairs, political intrigue, and acts of deception that shock even the standards of imperial Rome. Whether these accounts are entirely true or exaggerated by hostile sources remains uncertain. Roman historians often portrayed powerful women in extreme terms, casting them as either paragons of virtue or embodiments of corruption. But what is undeniable is how quickly Messalina's position collapsed. Accused of conspiracy and betrayal, she was executed on imperial orders. Her downfall was swift and final, a reminder of how precarious power could be for women in Rome. One moment she stood at the center of the empire, the next, she was erased from it. In contrast to such dramatic stories, many Roman women sought stability through careful adherence to social norms. They cultivated reputations for modesty, loyalty, and devotion to family. Clothing itself became a symbol of virtue. The stola, a traditional garment worn by married women, signified respectability and honor. To lose the right to wear it was to lose one's social standing. Yet even within these boundaries, women found subtle ways to assert themselves. Letters from the Roman world reveal glimpses of personal agency, women managing estates, arranging marriages, and maintaining complex networks of relationships. These actions may not have carried official titles or public recognition, but they shaped the social fabric of Rome in quiet, persistent ways. Religion also offered a space where women could hold visible roles. Beyond the Vestal Virgins, women participated in festivals, rituals, and household worship. They maintained family shrines, honored ancestors, and upheld traditions that connected generations. These practices were not merely symbolic. They reinforced identity, continuity, and belonging within a society that valued order above all else. But even sacred roles could become sites of fear and control. The Vestal Virgins, once again, stand as a stark example. Their lives were defined by both privilege and danger. They were freed from the authority of a father or husband, granted independence rare for Roman women. Yet this freedom came at the cost of absolute expectation. Their vow of chastity was not simply a personal commitment. It was believed to be tied to the safety of Rome itself. If the sacred fire they tended were to go out, or if a Vestal were accused of breaking her vow, it was seen as an omen of disaster for the entire city. One recorded case describes a Vestal condemned for violating her duty. She was led in silence through the streets, her face covered, as citizens watched with a mixture of fear and reverence. At the edge of the city, a small underground chamber had been prepared. Inside were minimal provisions, a lamp, a small amount of food, a bed. The entrance was sealed when she descended. The ritual allowed Rome to avoid directly killing her, but the outcome was inevitable. Buried alive, she became both a warning and a sacrifice to the fragile balance of Roman belief. Moments like these reveal the underlying anxiety that shaped Roman attitudes toward women. They were seen as both essential and potentially dangerous, guardians of virtue, yet also capable of bringing dishonor or even divine punishment upon the community. This duality created a constant tension, one that influenced laws, customs, and personal relationships. As the Roman Republic transitioned into the empire, these dynamics evolved but did not disappear. Imperial women, mothers, wives, and daughters of emperors, became powerful symbols within the state. Their images appeared on coins, their names recorded in official inscriptions. They represented stability, continuity, and the legitimacy of the ruling dynasty. One such figure was Agrippina the Younger, a woman whose life embodied both influence and danger. She was the sister of an emperor, the wife of another, and the mother of one of Rome's most infamous rulers. Ancient sources describe her as intelligent, ambitious, and deeply involved in political affairs. She navigated the corridors of power with skill, securing her son's position as emperor. Yet her influence also made her a target. In a chilling turn of events, she was eventually murdered on the orders of her own son. The details of her death are recorded with grim fascination. A failed attempt to kill her through a collapsing boat, followed by a more direct and violent execution. Her story reflects the ultimate risk faced by women who move too close to the center of power. Influence could elevate them, but it could also destroy them. By the later centuries of the empire, some legal reforms began to shift the position of women slightly. Greater rights in property ownership and inheritance allowed certain women to gain financial independence. Marriage practices evolved, granting wives more control over their own assets. Yet these changes did not fundamentally alter the structure of Roman society. Women remained excluded from formal political power, their roles defined more by tradition than by law. The legacy of Roman women is therefore not a single story, but a mosaic of experiences. It includes the quiet resilience of those who managed households and raised families, the suffering of those whose lives were constrained by systems they could not escape, the calculated influence of those who navigated the dangerous world of imperial politics, and the tragic figures whose stories were shaped by scandal, fear, and violence. History preserves fragments of these lives, inscriptions on tombs, lines in letters, accounts written by male historians. Each fragment offers a glimpse into a world where women existed at the heart of society, yet often on its margins of power. And as the centuries passed, the empire changed, its structures evolving, its boundaries shifting. But the underlying tension remained. Women continued to live within a system that both depended on them and restrained them. The story of women in ancient Rome does not end with a single conclusion. It lingers in fragments scattered across time like broken pieces of a larger truth. In the ruins of Roman houses, archaeologists uncover tools of daily life, mirrors, jewelry, spinning weights, silent reminders of lives once lived behind closed doors. In inscriptions carved into stone, names appear briefly before fading into anonymity. A daughter, a wife, a mother, remembered for a moment, then lost again to history. The empire celebrated its generals, its emperors, its victories. Monuments rose to honor conquest and power. Yet the lives of women, so essential to the fabric of Roman society, were rarely given the same permanence. Their influence was often hidden, their struggles unrecorded, their voices filtered through the perspectives of others, and still they endured. They shaped families, preserved traditions, and navigated a world that offered them limited control over their own fate. Some found ways to influence the course of history from the shadows. Others became symbols of virtue, of scandal, of warning, but most lived and died without recognition. When we look back at Rome, we see the grandeur of empire, the triumph of armies, the rise and fall of rulers. But beneath it all lies another story, quieter, unwritten, and far more human. A story of lives lived within boundaries, and the silent strength it took to endure them.